Today we're speaking with Anum Awan, who is an interaction designer and new media artist born and raised in Lahore, Pakistan, who currently resides in Oakland, California, Ramaytush Ohlone land. They craft mixed reality experiences by blending physical and digital media, centering queer, immigrant, and non-Western narratives. Their work manifests as installations, projections, video, live visuals, and programmed electronics. Anum, it's so good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Roula. It's great to see you as well.
So I was just thinking about the last time I saw you and saw your work, and I think the first time I saw your work was installed with. Is this right? The Third Muslim. Were you were included in that space? Is that right? In that exhibition?
I got involved in more like doing graphic design for them and sort of like the event logo and marketing, and that's my involvement.
It was a beautifully not simplistic, but just simple, powerful graphics that made it so, as someone in the audience, like just made it so attractive and wanting to spend time with it. And that was such a magnificent installation. I'm so glad that you were part of shaping the reach of it, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So we've invited you here to speak on your experience as being part of the Swana community here in the Bay Area. So the first question is like, what brought you to the Bay Area, and like, how did you find yourself like increasingly connected to the Swana community?
Yeah, so I moved to the Bay Area about 5 years ago now, and it was honestly kind of a random decision, as I feel like it often tends to be with like being an immigrant.
Yeah,
you know, there's something that is kind of attracting you, or you see like an opportunity, and next thing you know, you're packing your bags and you're moving there, and you don't like. I knew one person out here when I first moved here, and I used to be in Boston before. So I grew up in Lahore, then I moved to Boston where I spent 8 years, and then I came to the Bay Area. And I was very kind of ready to leave Boston by that time. I think it served me well for the time that I spent there, but I think I was seeking more of a creative community and being surrounded by more queer people and people of color. And I had visited a couple of times, and I really like appreciated the energy. So I applied to grad school, and that was sort of my way to switch visas and kind of shift across the country. I went to California College of the Arts. I did like a year-long master's program there, and that was great. But I think most of the Swana community that I connected with was definitely outside of the institution, and it was just from sort of going to events and meeting people there and building connections, and then folks inviting you to another one. So it was very organic, and somehow every Swana person that I met had a creative practice, whether it was, you know, they're like a DJ or they're like a visual artist or performance artist. And so like it really, really sort of changed my life and my world when I moved here, because that's not how it felt in Boston. At least I didn't really have a Swana community out there. So moving here, I think was the transformation point.
Yeah. So for the time that you spent in Boston, like, would you say that it was your experience, such as you did, like experience the Swana community, was it less sort of connected? Were there less opportunities for, as you beautifully described, like working with other visual, people working in the visual creative space? Were those opportunities just, it sounds like they were fewer and far between. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. That was sort of my experience. I went to art school, and my best friend from Pakistan, which is the reason why I moved to Boston, she went to music school over there. So, you know, we had this like community of creative folks, but the trend that I was noticing was after people finished college or spent some time, you know, they either moved to New York to kind of pursue their creative practice, or maybe back home, wherever they came from, or moved to the West Coast. Like a lot of people that I think were trying to build their creative practices and were people of color didn't really stick there. And so I think there was just a lot of movement. I guess it's sort of also known for being this college town, and kind of a middle place for people. I think, if you're in academia or healthcare or any of those professions, it's
Yeah.
awesome to be there. But yeah, for creative work, I didn't quite find the community that I was, I guess, seeking or needed.
Got it. Well, we are very lucky to have you here.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
and I think this is the first conversation I've had with Zamin Project, someone who works sort of between tech and the more formal visual arts community. And it's a very interesting space that you occupy. And it's something that we got sort of into in a co-produced event between SF Camera Work and Soma Arts. I'm wondering if you could talk about sort of straddling those two professional and creative spaces, and how how identifying as queer and as a person of color and as an immigrant, like how these all influence the way that you navigate those spaces.
Yeah, there's so much over there. I think I'm getting better at it, so I'm happy to share that after a number of years since that previous conversation. It's definitely a skill that one has to learn, and it started out with a lot of code switching for the most part, like almost pretty much being a completely different person at work from outside of work, like work in the professional sense. And I am learning ways to kind of be more authentic at my workplace, but I also I think it really depends on where you work and what the culture of that place is like. And I think with my experience of working at places like startups or these smaller, newer sort of companies, it's a lot harder because there just isn't that culture of like, it's a cliche, but like, yes, diversity and inclusivity, but none of those things are actually being practiced. But I am now starting to advocate more for other queer people being in the workspace, trying to make pronouns like a more common thing, and like asking people to use the correct pronouns for me. And it's a lot of work, and it's exhausting, but I also feel like I'm going through it at my own pace that feels comfortable to me. And so that's sort of where I'm at right now. And in terms of the work itself, it's interesting. I think for like visa reasons and other related reasons, I've always had to sort of maintain a job. And because I went into design, graphic design, and then moved to the Bay, it sort of turned into UX design, which I guess worked out for me because there's a lot of opportunities for that out here in the Bay. And so I'm just sort of following along with that. But I'm able to keep my art practice more personal, more sort of for me, like I have more agency over what I want to be involved with and what I don't want to be involved with. And sometimes I've dreamed about just sort of, quitting the job and being a full-time artist, and that's, that will always be there. But for now, I think kind of having both going at the same time feels sustainable to me. And I feel very fortunate to have that working out.
That's exciting. I wouldn't say that you were like ill-equipped or not adept when we talked about this a few years ago, but it sounds like you were closer to the beginning of your time here. And as you mentioned, like the constant state of code switching, and that you were trying to find your feet as far as school is concerned and work, and all the ways in which you were adapting to life here in the Bay Area. I just recall listening to you and thinking there was just a lot of experience and grace and thoughtfulness that sort of backed up all of this hard work that you were doing. And it's not a space that I inhabit necessarily as a white passing person, but I imagine for a person of color and someone who is queer and like trying to find your own footing and do it on your own terms in the multiple spaces that you inhabit could be exhausting, but it sounds like you found a way to make it sustainable. So that's a huge win, I imagine. Huge win.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
just thinking about all like the spaces in which I've seen your work. And it's such an interesting space that you occupy because it is somewhere between like design and something more formally recognized as a fine art exhibition or executions of these projects. Can you speak to some of the themes that come up in the work and things that are really interesting to you right now, or questions you've had that you're trying to sort out in that space?
yeah, for sure. So I guess after making the work for a little bit of time, I realized new media was the right category to
Yeah.
sort of identify with. It seems
Yeah.
to encompass a lot of these things, and so with my work, I've been really interested from the beginning in creating these sort of spaces of transcendence.
And can you talk about your the motivations, the inspirations like that directly inform your creative practice? And I'm also curious if there's ever any like overlap into the tech work, the design work that you do. That's a really interesting space that you occupy.
Yeah, definitely. So I've always been really interested in creating spaces that have a sense of or a feeling of transcendence. And so when viewers are in this immersive installation or environment, they often feel like they've been removed from reality and they're kind of taking a break and they're in like an alternative space. And a lot of these spaces are focus on themes of nostalgia and queerness and a Swana immigrant experience. And they're often mediated by technology, and it just sort of keeps changing. I have done a lot of work with projections and projection mapping and sort of filling a room with light, or even I've done this with live performances of taking, like art footage of Sufi shrines or Islamic architectural elements and mixing them live to music. This often happens in collaboration with a sound artist. And I've also worked a little bit with electronics. And so just some small scale circuitry, which then becomes like an interactive piece. And so for the show at Southern Exposure in early January 2020, I built like this arcade style console that was hooked up to a number of buttons. And so every time you pressed a different button, it would play a commercial from Pakistani television from like the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so just, bringing back some of these old stories, these forgotten stories, also subverting a lot of narratives and bringing an element of queerness to them. It's kind of experimental, and I feel like kind of changes with every piece.
Yeah, that piece was just one of my favorite. Like I love that installation. Remember watching, as I was reviewing it, watching like each and every one of the I guess channels, so to speak, and was just so appreciating the way that you were sort of undermining the sort of, this is state TV, this is, it's not necessarily treated as an experimental space, but the way that you adapted some of that material, that it really kind of undermines that official sort of governmental official narrative, as far as like, this is what we want you to watch, these ads we want you to see, like just the way in which that was so beautifully beautifully subverted. And that was such a gift to spend time with, and just in the process learning about just how much control there was, if I understand it correctly, was and still is, as far as television programming and like that access to information, and how people, those living in Pakistan are just what information they have access to, and who's deciding what they have access to, was definitely an eye opener for me. But yeah, it sounds like that was one of the most interesting installations I think I've seen in a long time. So we're geeking out here in this moment.
Yeah.
Whoa. but I was curious about so live visuals and music, and is there for you, and maybe perhaps in your experience of it, is there a want to sort of make that the spiritual experience of Sufism, of mysticism, like make that sort of like replicate that through visuals, through sound, like for someone possibly, you know, who isn't, you know, who doesn't have that particular religious affiliation. I imagine it's like, I know for myself, like it's a profound experience to hear and to see that. But I'm curious, like what it's like for you, like sort of reanimating that for audiences.
Yeah, yeah. That one is really interesting, and I've done two versions of it at this point, and there's like a spin each time. So,
Yeah.
you know, while the experience of being in the Sufi shrine is so incredible and so moving, and you almost, you know, can recreate exactly what it is to be there, it's also, in my experience in Pakistan, a very male-dominated space.
Yeah.
And there's actually a lot of barriers to access. And this started off by me thinking like, oh, I'm here, I'm in the US, and like, I have so many barriers to go access the Sufi shrine here if I want to, because I'm just physically so far. And that's where the idea came from. It's like, well, what if I just make one here? How can I do that with technology? But then kind of going into, well, even when I'm in Pakistan, it's still really hard to access the Sufi shrine. And often, you know, the Sufi shrine is for like a saint, a Sufi saint who's buried in it. And in my research, there were always men. And so when I created the one at Soma Arts, I flipped the narrative and I made it about women. And it's just something that, you know, is so rampant in Pakistan, and we're talking about it more and more, but just like the violence against women is just unimaginable, and so difficult. And so it
Yeah.
was a moment that I really just kind of got to sit with, like, this story after story that was coming in of, like, you know, women just being murdered, or like, you know, having all this like horrific violence and being inflicted on them, and like was able to take all of that processing and put it into this work, which was like a shrine, like an altar that I created. And you know, that would be considered very, very like subversive and not orthodox.
Yeah.
So I think there's always ways that it's not quite the same. And I think that's okay. And I'm like, yeah, this is why I make it, is to make a new version of it, a different version of it.
Right. So there's two versions or two iterations of that installation so far. Do you have any, is there a third perhaps? And do you think about the iterations, like, do you think about it in advance of like the next exhibition, or are you constantly thinking about how do I like update this or modify it in a way like to reflect where your current thinking is? Is that a sort of thought for you?
I call it an ongoing body of work. I don't have any set ideas for when and what a third iteration might be like. And I'm kind of open to that. It's like, I have, you know, like if I can describe my brain, it's like there's many columns of like ongoing ideas and stuff. And there might be a moment where this column has a new section that's added to it because, you know, there's a show that's happening, or there's an idea that I had, and it'll sort of get worked into. But there's no deadline, there's no sort of end date. And I actually have not been thinking about the Sufi shrine as much. And so it's maybe going to be a while before we see a third one. But I would say, yeah, it might happen. And I don't know right now what it was going to be like.
Yeah. I hope so. It was a remarkable opportunity to stand and witness that as part of the reorienting the imaginary. That exhibition was just remarkable on its own, but as someone who has never and may never step foot in a Sufi shrine, that felt like a witnessing opportunity and sort of an exchange of knowledge that I wouldn't have had in any other or under any other circumstances. And it really was a visual and auditory gift, I think, that you gave those of us in the audience. So
Thank you.
so thank you for that. It was really really extraordinary. So part of Zamin project, we're talking about resources and what that means, and it can be widely interpreted. You know, many of the other artists I've interviewed have come to it from different perspectives. When I say resources, like what does that conjure for you as you're thinking about the Swana community? How does that for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, when I first thought about it, I was like, yeah, the Swana community has been a huge resource for me, but not really resource in the way that we often think about the word
Yeah,
resource, like yes, funding, yes, grants, yes, money, yes, more projects. But I think it's been more about the relationships that I've been able to make with folks. I think a
yeah,
lot of people I've met through, again, like art events, performances, and all of these sorts of gatherings. But I feel like I've been really fortunate that friendships have come out of it, and
yeah,
there's just just so much exchange of knowledge and of shared history that I think is kind of impossible to do with anyone else in such a short amount of time. And we've had so many similar experiences of like navigating visas or like traveling and all these complications, and it just feels like I think the Swana community is able to kind of hold all of that to like help us, or help me kind of move through a lot of important things.
yeah.
And it's been just yeah, so magical to have these humans in my life. And sometimes we stay in touch and sometimes we don't, but it's so quick to like kind of pick up where we left off. And I
Yeah,
really feel like it kind of grounds me in living in the Bay Area. Is like, okay,
yeah,
I might not be talking to everyone all the time, but I know that like if something is needed, like I'll be there for folks, and I know they'll be here for me. And I think that's such
yeah.
a huge resource.
That is, yeah, absolutely. There's a sort of unspoken shorthand that happens. I haven't seen you in years, but I imagine the next time I'll see you,
Right.
that's sometime this year, it will just sort of pick up where it left off, as though there was no time that has elapsed at all.
Mm-hmm.
That shorthand is such a gift,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you described it just perfectly, in knowing that even if there isn't ongoing or frequent conversations or interactions with people, that it's understood that as part of a community, like, we will do whatever we can to help our friends
Mm-hmm.
and to help the people in this community to realize, like, whatever project it is, whatever idea they have, like whatever it might be, that there is an extraordinary group of people who if you ask for help, like, they'll be there to lend what they have. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a powerful part of, I think, being part of the Swana community. So yeah, I think you described it perfectly. All right, so the last question, and this is, I think, my favorite so far, is like, what is top of mind for you? What are you thinking about these days?
Oh my God, yeah. So many things. I feel like I think just because I haven't really even been making that much art in the last year, and I've just been taking more things in than putting them out. And I
Yeah,
feel like my brain is just so full of stuff at this point. I don't even know where to begin. But yeah, I think I had a moment in the pandemic of feeling a little bit disconnected from the art practice and just sort of forgetting why I do this, what is it that I do, and just like having not that much access to spaces or opportunities. But I'm happy to be coming back to it slowly. And I guess one of the things that I can't stop thinking about these days is how we're actively seeing the colonization of space happening, and it
oh yeah,
just
yeah,
is so like, I
wow,
guess, top of mind for
yep.
me. And it's like suddenly we have so many billionaires, and all they want to do is to go into space and colonize it.
Mhm.
And all this stuff that we thought was science fiction until like last year
Yeah,
is suddenly happening. And just between Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Richard Branson, there's been this unimaginable amount of money that's being invested in this field.
yep,
And um and I feel like their attitude is like they have destroyed Earth, they have kind of used up all the resources, and now they want to go and start building these colonies in space. And it makes me nervous to see like who's going to go into space and actually build this stuff. Like, are we about to see this new incentivization of marginalized folks that are going to be the first ones sent there to start building the infrastructure? And I just I feel like it's there's so much to unpack there, but
yes,
it's kind of coupled with like people's excitement, like why is space so exciting to people and why has it been for so long? And like, I really think we need to deconstruct like our ideas of space, and we can't just, you know, every time we want to disconnect from the earth, we can't be like, oh yeah, space, you know,
Yeah.
this big opportunity or
Yeah.
something. And I feel really like I'm like, you know, referencing a lot of my own work as well, is like I use a lot of space imagery, like when there's that moment that you don't want to say what time or place this is in, or you just
Yeah.
use like stars and a space background and suddenly
Yeah.
everything feels good. And it's,
Yep.
you know, I want to think about that more. So yeah, I think a lot about space colonization and the sort of thoughtless development of AI and all the propaganda that's going with it, of like,
Yeah.
oh, humans are going to be freed from working in the future, whereas it's actually just going to make a lot of marginalized people obsolete. And you know, wealth will be concentrated amongst a few that have like that knowledge, that super knowledge of how to control everything. And
Absolutely.
you know, I think my work in the tech field really, you know, exposes me to a lot of these realities that I
Yeah.
feel like sometimes are maybe one step removed for like other people that aren't so closely in
Yeah.
that world. And I just, you know, I feel like I don't know what to do with all of this, but I need to do something. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to figure out, how to work into
Yeah.
maybe new projects or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. That everything you said, just I think about the, you know, there've been however many like movies, for example, which are it's a cultural, it's a mass touch point for many of us in thinking about space, and the way that it's constructed, as you know, all the myriad ways that outer space is constructed. But what we're facing right now, like that it too closely resembles like the first stages of like the wealthiest white men like are going to get
Mm-hmm.
planet, and you know, if Mars is the destination, or you know, whatever it is, that it yes, it's fiction, yes, it's cinema, yes, like there's all kinds of things like that is not necessarily happening, but it so closely resembles like the cultural sort of script that's been written for us, so to speak, cinematically.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's more than a little bit worrying for all of the reasons you articulated so beautifully. But so for myself, it's just that the feeling of like, if they get off the planet, if this moves forward, like they're going to leave this, in the worst case scenario, leave this beautiful planet that we inhabit, like this sort of burnt out husk. And they're going to make sure that whomever next populates Mars, for example, will be the wealthiest, like just like colonizers that have ever lived. And that is absolutely terrifying, that particular narrative.
Yeah, there's just no end.
Yeah, there's, you know, we're so far past the entertainment side of science fiction, and well into like possibly like fiction, but it also like it's truly, it's alarming. And as a species, our moral fiber is not sturdy enough to keep up with that, to contain it, so to speak. And that is, it's terrifying. But I think, yeah, you hit all of that just like right on the nose. So thank you for thank you for mentioning that, and you know, knowing that a lot of us are thinking about it, and that will be, and I think that will soon be, if it's not already, like a space for creative work and thought and writing, like everything that goes into trying to understand what this all means for us in the future. I, for one, am glad that someone as smart as you is thinking about this. So
yeah, no, that was so great to hear you reflect all that back, because I'm like, yes, okay, there are other people. We are all collectively thinking about this, and we need to keep talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be, well, only speaking for myself, but try not to like nervously like bite off all of my nails, being like, what are we going to do? Yeah, how do we do this? But we'll talk about it, and we'll find our way into it. But thank you so much for this interview. Thank you for the chance to speak with you today. And we'll hopefully, like as soon as we all can, gather on the other side and be able to hug one another again after so long.
Yeah, no, I really look forward to that. It was great to have this opportunity to catch up with you as well. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you again.
And thanks everyone
All
for
right.
watching. We'll see you here again for Zamin Space or Zamin Project in this space again very soon. Thank you.
Cool.